Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution. And so I do want to continue to talk this month about the idea of stillness and how very important it is and how very helpful it is to cultivate the inner state of stillness. And specifically today, I want to talk about the idea of the stillness of the mind, the stillness of the mind. And as I was reflecting upon this lesson and reflecting upon some of my own experiences with the practice of stillness, one of the very first memories of the idea of stillness came to my mind, and it kind of surprised me because it wasn't one originally associated with meditation. It was one associated with my teenage years of ice skating and being at the House of Ice in La Mesa at about 4:30 in the morning, way before school would start. That's when all figure skaters would get the best ice time in. The rink was dark and damp and very, very cold at that hour, so cold that when you would step out on the ice, you could hear a crackling sound. But anyway, I and others would be on the ice at that hour, very quiet in there, very still, practicing what was called our figure eights. I don't even think they do them anymore, but they were a significant part of a figure skater's practice time. And every practice session would include doing these figure eights, and it was actually skating on one foot, using the edges of the blade to carve into the ice a figure eight or other figures as you got further along. But in order to do it and to do it well, it took exquisite concentration and actually a very clear and very still and disciplined mind. If your mind wandered, if you weren't paying attention, you would create what was called a flat, which would be when instead of being on just one tiny edge of the blade, you were actually riding on both edges of the blade. There was this tiny little hollow on that 1/4-inch blade. And it took exquisite stillness, even though your body was moving, exquisite stillness of mind to be able to do that and do that well. And then fast forward many, many, many years after that, as I started to really grow into my own spiritual practice, not just studying unity, but studying much more broadly the world's religions, coming into the experience of the Tao Te Ching. And they're really experiencing the importance around the teaching of the inner life and the practice of stillness and quiet, not as an escape from the reality of life, but in preparation to better meet the reality of life, in preparation to better meet the stuff that happens in all of our lives. So this practice of cultivating a still mind. I shared with you last week that I've been pulling upon not only my own life experience in this series, but also looking at Eckhart Tolle's book, Stillness Speaks, and Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness is the Key. And one of the things I like about Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness is the Key, is he pulls a lot, as he writes about the idea of stillness, from history. And in one section of the book, he is writing about the stillness of the mind, and he is giving this elaborate retelling of the story of Kennedy and of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how the tendency often in politics is a knee-jerk reaction and an immediacy, and how Kennedy seemed to really practice a certain stillness of mind and calmness that helped him to try to better understand the Russians' motivation and to avoid nuclear war. And so this idea of stillness, it's like this capturing an ability to live within the reality of the world, but at the same time knowing that there is a space and experience within that can remain untouched by the chaos around us. The Tao Te Ching writes about some of this idea of stillness. Careful as someone crossing an iced over stream, alert as a warrior in enemy territory, courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, and clear as a glass of water. Can you get a feel for this? You know, the caution of walking over an iced over stream, of letting the mud settle in the water until that you can experience the clarity. Stilling the muddiness of our minds is incredibly important. The ability to still the muddiness, the chaos, the clutter in our minds is incredibly important, because each of us, we're not going to be facing what Kennedy faced with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we are going to be facing our own personal crises, whether it is an upcoming surgery, or whether it is the possibility of ending a long-standing relationship, or divorcing a marriage of many years, or dealing with an adult child that has run away. There are things that we experience in our lives that can feel like the turmoil of the muddiness of life. And in order to be able to be with those things and to access a greater wisdom to be able to deal with them well, we have to be able to experience a stillness of mind. A stillness of mind, so that out of that stillness, so out of that clarity, better answers can come for us. I want to share some ideas with you this morning, 5 or 6. I say 5 or 6, depending on how long I spend on the first 5. We'll see if we'll get to the 6. But 5 or 6 ideas of what this stillness of the mind looks like, how we do this. The first, I would say, is this idea. It has to do with becoming and being fully present in the moment. Being fully present in the moment. When I say that, what do you think about? When I say that, can you reflect upon times in your own life, and hopefully not too far back, where you really were fully present in that moment? You see, there's no way we can experience stillness of the mind if we are not fully present in the moment. We will be all over the place. I recently learned of an example that was pretty mind-blowing of an artist. She's a Serbian artist. Her name is Maria Abramovic. I think I'm saying it somewhat correctly, Abramovic. She's a Serbian performance artist, a writer, and an art filmmaker. And in 2010, she had a very unusual exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was called The Artist is Present. And what the exhibit was about is that Marina was seated in a chair on one side of a wooden table, facing an empty chair. And for 3 months, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 3 months, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, she would sit in that chair across from an empty chair with only a wood table separating her, and she would wait for people who had made an appointment to sit in front of her, no words exchanged, just being fully present with that person, locking eyes and being fully present in that moment. And she related about what discipline that took, that in one way it seems like you're doing nothing, right? You're just sitting there 8 hours a day for 3 months. But the amount of concentration, the amount of energy, not in the way that we necessarily think of physical energy, but I guess of spiritual and emotional energy and mental energy, was significant, sitting there fully present. Here's how one visitor described the experience, and this visitor was so taken by it that this visitor made appointments to sit with her in that silence, in that presence, 21 times. He wrote, a transforming experience. It's luminous, it's uplifting, it has many layers, but it always comes back to being present, breathing, maintaining eye contact. It's an amazing journey to be able to experience and participate in this peace. Ryan Holiday, in his book, when he writes about this, says, something like this. He says, who is so talented that they can afford to bring only part of themselves to bear on a problem or an opportunity? When Marina sat in that chair across from the people who were watching her exhibit or being part of the exhibit, she was bringing her full self into that experience. Ryan says, who is so talented that they can afford to bring only part of themselves to bear on a problem or an opportunity? Whose relationships are so strong that they can get away with not showing up? Who is so certain that they'll get another moment that they can confidently skip over this one? The less energy we waste regarding the past or worrying about the future, the more energy we will have for what's in front of us. I want to go back to a line that I just read of his. Who is so talented that they can afford to bring only part of themselves to bear on a problem or an opportunity? This idea of being present, being fully present, means that we are bringing our whole selves into an experience, our whole selves into the moment, our whole selves into the conversation or the conflict or the exchange, leaving no part of ourselves out. And what comes to my mind when I reflect on that idea of bringing our whole selves into an experience is something that I've come to begin to learn, at least a little bit, in the anti-racism and racial equity work I've been doing. And I've learned from my Black and brown members and friends this idea or this experience of code switching, of how if you are not part of the dominant culture, which in our country, the dominant culture looks like me, white, you learn very, very naturally and very much growing up to code switch so that you fit in with the dominant culture when you are with the dominant culture at work or at church or anywhere else. And what I learned as I sat and I listened, being fully present to my Black and brown members and friends, I began to understand a little bit more of how that is to negate from those members the opportunity to bring their full selves into the conversations that we were having. It was as if they felt the need, because we've put them in that situation, I believe, to leave a part of themselves out of the picture. And I think this is what Ryan Holiday is writing about in this passage, that who among us can afford to do that? And if we think about it in terms of community dynamics or group dynamics or culture, we can't afford to have people leaving a significant part of their culture, their identity, their way of thinking, their way of being out of the conversation. Because when we do, we all wind up hurting as a result of that. We all wind up with a less than full picture, and a fuller picture is going to always help us make a better decision. So being present, becoming present, practicing that is a piece of cultivating a still mind. A second is this idea of limiting our inputs. In other words, being more selective in terms of who and what we put into our minds. Limiting our inputs, being a little more selective into who and what we put into our minds. This shouldn't be anything new to those of us who practice metaphysics, because we practice very much trying to train our minds, trying to be a little more deliberate, a little more specific in what we are going to allow to remain in our consciousness. And this is taking it a little bit further. It's taking it to the place of limiting what and being more selective about what we bring into our minds. When Holiday writes about this idea in his book, he reflects on a story told of Napoleon, that when Napoleon was ruling, that he had made it a practice. He told his secretary to never present him with mail as soon as it came, that he wanted that mail to be set aside for about 3 weeks, because he felt that oftentimes in 3 weeks, matters that weren't super, super important would just kind of resolve themselves. And I've thought a lot about that in this time of pandemic. I thought about all the things I worked so hard at the end of last year and the beginning of this year to lay out and to plan and to structure for 2020, and the hours and the months of trying to fit in so many things because I thought I had to get to it right then and there. And part of that is my makeup, part of that is helpful at times. But this experience of COVID really caused me to step back and say, wait, if I had just waited a little bit longer, I wouldn't have needed to do those things because all of those things involved bringing people either to my home to acknowledge and celebrate them or the many different activities and classes and events we were so used to having here at the church. So I think there might be an element of wisdom in Napoleon's practice there that maybe, just maybe, we could benefit from giving things a little more time and space to kind of work themselves out. Not to ignore them, but maybe to just give a little bit more time, a little more space to let some things work themselves out, to see if trivial problems might solve themselves. Another suggestion he made is the idea that maybe we should not consume news in real time. Maybe we should not consume news in real time, and we should consume it a little after the fact, because what's really important is still going to be there for our attention. I don't know about you, but I think that's helpful right now. Third practice to help develop greater stillness of mind is this idea of emptying the mind. And this is very much a meditative experience. It's very much a Buddhist practice of emptying the mind. There's a story about, and I'm stepping into dangerous territory here. Anytime I talk about a sport other than ice skating or skiing, I am stepping into dangerous territory. So I'm gonna have to look at my notes more. But it's a story about LA Dodger Shawn Green. He was in his third season with the Dodgers. The year was 2002, and apparently he was having the worst slump of his career, so badly, such a bad slump that he would be out on the field and the fans would be booing him that bad. And so when he would come up to bat, he had all these stories running around in his mind of the negativity, of the fact that he was in this really, really bad slump. But he was able to turn it around, and not by trying harder and working harder, but by practicing, going to his Buddhist practice. And if you think about it, I can't imagine what it is to be standing at the home plate with bat in your hand, looking at the pitcher, and not just running away when that ball at 90 miles an hour is coming like almost straight at you. Any sport that involves a ball, I always wind up ducking. If it's coming at me, anyway, so you get the picture of it takes tremendous concentration for a batter to be able to deal with that ball coming at 90 miles an hour and paying attention to it and when to swing. Let me read some of the story to you because it moved me when I read this in Holliday's book. He says it was the sixth and final time of the game, and he stepped into the batter's box. He had already played amazingly well at this point because he had been practicing his Buddhist teachings. He had been practicing not trying harder, but trying to empty his mind to get out all that toxic thinking and all that toxic input. And so he had already been playing at this point in that game amazingly well, and it was a third pitch, and he slammed it. And this is how Holliday writes about it. As Green's teammates went nuts in the dugout, he kept his head down and rounded the bases with the same calm, deliberate trot as in his previous 3 home runs. You couldn't tell it from the lack of celebrating, but he was in that moment only the 14th player in history ever to hit 4 home runs in a single game. 6 for 6 with 19 total bases and 7 runs batted in, perhaps the single greatest one-game performance in all of baseball. The entire crowd of 26,728 people at an away game rose for a standing ovation. But Green was already clearing that all away, coming back to his routine. He took off his batting gloves, swept the experience from his mind, keeping his mind empty to use the next time. it's an exquisite example. An exquisite example. When we talk in metaphysics about a clear mind, we are talking about being able to sweep away that toxic messaging that runs in so many of our minds, to gently sweep that away, to allow our minds to find that still, clear space. A fourth idea is the idea of practicing slowing down, taking time to really look and think deeply. Let me say that again. To slow down, to take time to really look and think deeply, to slow down. Appearances can be so deceiving, and jumping to conclusions based on what we see in a flash of an eye can be absolutely erroneous. To slow down, to practice taking that second look, to paying closer attention, to thinking deeply. I think about the times that my family and I go up to the Eastern Sierras in the summertime. We didn't do that this year, but I think about the times we have. And my son and my husband and my daughter love to go fishing on June Lake or Silver Lake. I'm not much for fishing, but I do love the scenery all around me. And one of the things that I'm aware of as I watch them fish is just how everything slows down. The conversation is very quiet, if at all. The movement is very quiet. Everything, they're really, really paying attention to that tiny little jiggle on the line. And as I've tried to watch them watch that line, I've gotten an experience of what it is to slow down and to take time to look more carefully and to pay attention. And what's interesting is when they do, and there's that little jiggle, they know just how to yank that rod or that hook or whatever it is they're doing. They're going to be on my case later on, correcting me with fishing technique. But when they pull it in, they're able to pull in what was lurking beneath the surface. That's kind of like what happens to us if we cultivate this stillness of mind, if we will slow down and allow ourselves some spaciousness to think more deeply. And then we will be able to pull out of the depths greater wisdom. The more quiet I become, the clearer I can hear that voice within. Fifth idea is this idea of letting go, of detachment. Boy, is that a biggie, right? An attached mind, a holding on mind, is an agitated mind. A mind that can let go, a mind that can detach, is a mind that can find a state of equilibrium. It is a mind that can experience some stillness. If you read about some of the experiences that actors have when they describe what is necessary for them to do a role and do it very well, I think about some of the things that Morgan Freeman has said about his acting, is it's not about thinking about the role. It's about, yeah, you have to learn the role, but it's not about thinking about it. When it comes time for that camera to go and to capture that role, it is about being it. It is about letting go and becoming. Letting go and becoming. And so this is another aspect of the still mind. And then the very last that I just want to toss out there is the idea of cultivating silence. Just cultivating it. Just choosing to have a certain little island of time in your day where you turn everything off and you just sit quietly. You just sit quietly to cultivate that silence. You know, think about this. When we want to honor someone, someone who has passed, we often, especially if it was a very loved leader or very famous person, we will have a time of complete silence, right? A time of complete silence to just say, in this moment of silence, we remember, in this moment of silence, we acknowledge. What would it be like if we declared a national day of quiet? Boy, we could use one right now, don't you think? With all the noise in our world and with all the political noise leading up to Tuesday, and perhaps after, we could use a day of quiet. I'm just saying, let's everybody unplug. Everybody just get still and quiet and think deeply. I hope at least one or two of these ideas resonated with you as something practical and something you can choose to practice in your life to help enjoy all of the benefits of developing greater stillness within. Namaste.